The lantern above the door had burned all night. Jakob did not remember lighting it at dusk. The sea outside was the color of cold tin. A bell rang once at the harbor gate below. Then a second time, slower and lower than before. Someone was coming up the long stone path. Jakob set down the chisel he had held for nearly an hour. He wiped cedar dust onto his apron. The kettle on the stove had gone quiet. He could hear boots on the path, 3 sets, heavy and certain. Beneath them, a 4th tread barely touched the ground. He did not rise from his stool. He waited the way old men wait, with stillness instead of patience. The knock that came was a fist used as a hammer. The door shook in its frame. Outside, a voice spoke his name the way an auctioneer reads a number. Jakob stood and crossed the small front room. He passed the empty rocking chair by the window, the chair no one had used in years. He opened the door to the gray morning. 3 envoys stood on the stone step in long coats. Silver thread of the Vishari Concord got the dull sky. Behind them, between 2 armored guards, stood a 4th figure draped in a coarse gray shroud. The envoys did not bow. The tallest pushed a folded parchment into Jakob's hands. He stepped aside the way a man steps aside from spoiled meat. The shrouded figure did not move at all. The parchment was sealed in pale blue wax. The crest of the off-world delegation was pressed into it. Jakob did not open it. He had heard the rumors of the harbor for weeks, the talk of a peace marriage no one had wanted, a bride no clan would claim. He looked instead at the shrouded figure on his step. The wind moved the gray cloth at her ankles. Her feet were bare on the cold stone. He could not see her face. He could only see the small tremor where her hands were folded inside the cloth. The envoy spoke without warmth. The way a clerk reads from a ledger, the treaty had been signed in the capital. Each human settlement was to receive a Vishari spouse. It was meant as a gesture of binding. The lower houses had been given the educated daughters. Jakob was a craftsman from a fishing village by the cold sea. He, the envoy made clear, was to receive the leftover bride. He then said the word the upper houses had whispered for a year. Defective, the bride beneath the shroud could not speak. She never had. She was the one no clan would house. No general would claim her. No temple would bless her. Sending her to a human carver in a salt-eaten village, the envoy said with the smallest smile, was the elegant solution. Jakob folded the parchment closed without reading it. The guards uncovered her then with no ceremony. They pulled the shroud away and let it fall onto the wet stone. She did not flinch from the cold air. Her skin was the pale violet of dusk. Her hair was the dark of wet kelp. Her eyes, steady silver. A thin iron collar circled her throat. Jakob saw the collar before he saw her face. The envoy held out a small key on a copper ring. He explained in the same flat tone that the collar was a tradition. It marked her as a bride with no voice. The bride was therefore the responsibility of her husband. Jakob could keep the collar on her, the envoy said, or remove it. The other villages, he added, had chosen to keep theirs on. Jakob took the copper key without answering. He turned it once in his palm. The metal was warm. The envoys turned and walked back down the stone path. Their boots made the same heavy sound returning. Jakob stood in the open doorway. The parchment was in one hand, the copper key in the other. The woman they had called defective stood barefoot on his step. The sea wind lifted a strand of dark hair across her face. She did not move to brush it away. He stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She did not move at first. Her silver eyes searched his face the way a wounded animal searches a stranger. Jakob lowered his own eyes so she would not feel measured. He spoke quietly, more to the threshold than to her. He said only, "Come inside. The floor is warmer than the stone." She came in then. She walked the way a person walks whose feet have always been too loud. She paused at the rocking chair by the window. She looked at it once with a softness that surprised him. Then she moved past it and stood in the center of the room. Her arms were held tight against her sides. Jakob closed the door. The lantern still burned. He set the parchment on the table without reading it. He laid the copper key beside it on the wood. He gestured to the small stool by the stove. She did not sit. He gestured again, more slowly, with his palm open. She lowered herself to the edge of the stool. He poured water from the kettle into a clay cup. He set it in front of her. She did not drink. He did not press her. Instead, he sat down on his own stool across the table. He put his hands flat on the worn wood so she could see them. He looked at the iron collar at her throat, then at the small copper key beside the parchment, then at her silver eyes. He picked up the key and held it up so she could see it in the morning light. He said her freedom had never been his to take. But the collar, he said quietly, the collar he could open. He stood and came around the table. He knelt beside her stool so that his face was lower than hers. He held out the key on his open palm. He waited without moving. He did not reach toward her throat. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, with the smallest motion, she tilted her chin upward. She lifted her dark hair away from the back of her neck. Jakob fitted the key into the iron lock with hands that had carved cedar for 40 years. The collar clicked open. He lifted it away from her skin as gently as he would lift a sleeping bird. There was a thin red line beneath where the iron had rested. He set the collar down on the floor beside him. He did not put it on the table. The table was where he ate. He stood and carried the collar to the small iron stove. He laid it on the warm hearthstone as if it were a thing being banished rather than displayed. When he turned back, she was watching him. He did not know her name. The parchment had not given one. He understood then, with quiet certainty, that no one in the upper houses had ever spoken her name aloud where she could hear it. He sat back down across from her. He folded his rough hands on the table between them. He said, "My name is Jakob." She watched his mouth as he said it. She did not try to repeat the shape of it. After a moment, she lowered her eyes to the clay cup of water. She lifted it with both hands and drank slowly. She drank the way a person drinks who needed permission. When she set the cup down, there was a tiny tremor in her wrist she could not hide. Jakob looked away to spare her. The first day passed in small motions. He showed her the room where his late wife's clothes still hung in a cedar wardrobe. She could wear them. He showed her the kitchen, the bread tin, the small jar of honey. He did not show her the workshop yet. He cooked a simple supper of fish stew and bread. He set a bowl in front of her at the table. She did not eat until he had begun. Then she ate slowly, as though tasting each piece. She ate as though she had not been given warm food in a long time. He kept his eyes on his own bowl. He understood that being watched while eating could feel like being measured. He left her that small privacy. After supper, she stood and gathered both bowls without being asked. She carried them to the basin. He almost stopped her, almost said she did not have to. Then he understood that sitting still while a stranger waited on her would feel worse. He took up a cloth instead. That night, he made up the small bed in the side room. It had been his daughter's, 20 years ago, before the fever. He laid down a clean wool blanket and a folded shirt. He showed her the latch on the door from the inside. He showed it twice. Then he stepped out and closed it gently. He did not sleep at first. He sat in the rocking chair by the window with the parchment unopened in his lap. He watched the lantern above the door burn down to a low blue flame. He heard no sound from the room. He understood that a person told her quiet was her flaw, might have learned to make no sound while resting. Sometime past the middle of the night, he rose. He went to his workshop at the back of the house. The cedar he had been shaping sat half-finished on the bench. He set the half-finished piece aside. From the scrap bin, he took a small, smooth offcut. It was the size of his palm, pale gold with a fine, straight grain. He sat at the bench and lit the oil lamp above it. He picked up his finest knife. He thought about the envoys and the word defective. He thought about the iron collar still cooling on the hearthstone. He thought about a woman who had never been given a name in her own house. He understood he could not give her speech. He could not give back lost years. But he could give her one thing tonight no one had given her. He could give her a name. He did not know what to call her. He sat with the cedar in his hand for a long time. He thought of her silver eyes searching his face at the door. He thought of the way she had lifted her hair so he could open the collar. He thought of how she had drunk the water with both hands. He thought of the word for first light in the old tongue his grandmother had spoken. He began to carve slowly. He worked the way he had worked on his wife's wedding ring 40 years ago, the way he had worked on his daughter's cradle 30 years ago, the way he had carved his daughter's small grave marker not long after. He cut the letters deep so the wood would hold them. He smoothed the edges with the side of his thumb until they felt right. When the lamp burned low, the small plaque in his hand read clear, careful letters. The letters spelled Aylin. He did not know if she would accept it. He did not know if she would accept it. He did not know if a stranger could give a name. But he set the plaque on the corner of the workbench under the lamp. He laid it where he could see it at first light. He went back into the house quietly. He slept a few hours in his own bed, for the first time in years, without the chair. In the morning, the lantern above the door had gone out on its own. The fog had lifted with the dawn wind. He found her in the kitchen when he came down. She had built up the stove fire with small, careful motions. A pot of water was warming. She turned when he came in, and her silver eyes searched his face again, but with a different question this time. He did not give her the plaque yet. He thought it would feel demanded if he laid it before her at breakfast. Instead, he made tea and cut bread. He set out a small dish of honey on the table. They ate together for the second time in their lives. The morning sun came in low through the window and lit the table between them. Neither of them spoke a word. Both of them stayed until the bread was gone. After breakfast, he led her, slowly, to the workshop. He had not shown it the day before. He had not wanted her to feel she had been bought to work. Now he opened the door and let her stand in the doorway. She looked at the bench and the chisels. Her silver eyes moved across the room the way a child's eyes move across an open garden. He walked to the bench and picked up the small wooden plaque. He brought it back to her in his open palm the way he had held out the copper key. He did not speak. He simply waited until she lifted her hand and took it from his palm. She turned it over and saw the letters cut deep into the gold cedar. She did not know how to read human script. He understood. He set his finger lightly on the first letter and said the sound. Then the next letter, then the next, the way one teaches a child. He spoke the name slowly, the whole of it, Aylin. He did not say, "This is your name." He only said the sound and let the wood and her own quiet do the rest between them. She looked at the plaque for a long time. Then she looked at him. Her silver eyes were wet, but no tear fell. Her face did not change. She closed her hand around the cedar so her fingers covered the letters. She pressed it once against her chest, above her heart. The motion was older than any treaty. She lowered her hand and held the plaque carefully in both palms. That afternoon, she carried it with her wherever she went in the house. He saw her set it on the kitchen shelf above the bread tin while she washed the dishes. He saw her carry it to the side room when she folded her blanket. By evening, she had cleared a small space on the windowsill of the side room. She set the plaque there, leaning against the glass. The last light of the day touched the carved letters. He said nothing. The first week passed in the slow rhythms of a house learning a second pair of feet. She rose before he did and built the stove fire. He made breakfast. She washed the bowls. He went to the workshop. She washed the bowls. He went to the workshop. She watched from the doorway until one morning he moved aside. He gestured to the second stool at the bench. She came in. She sat. She watched his hands move over the wood. He did not ask her to do anything yet. He understood that being given a tool too soon could feel like being given a debt she had not chosen. On the fourth day, she reached out very slowly. She picked up a curl of cedar shaving and turned it between her fingers. He saw the way her face changed when she smelled it. He understood then that her own people had given her almost nothing soft to hold. He began, without announcing it, to leave small offcuts on her end of the bench. Pale cedar, dark walnut, a piece of pine with a knot like an eye. She handled each one the way she had handled the plaque, with both hands, with care. He pretended not to watch. On the seventh day, he set a small dome knife in front of her. He set it beside a square of soft basswood, the kind he used for teaching. He did not look up to see what she did with them. When he finally looked, late afternoon, she had carved something. It was the curve of a small fish, the kind that ran in the cold streams of his coast. He did not know how she had known the shape. He looked at her, and she looked at him. He understood she had been watching his shelves and choosing what she could draw. He nodded once, slowly, and said, "Good." She did not smile. But her shoulders, which had been held high and tight against her ears since the first morning, dropped just a little. They dropped for a moment before she remembered herself and lifted them again. He pretended not to see. He picked up his own work and bent his head over it. He let her have her small, unguarded breath in private. The villagers came in the second week. They came because the harbor talked, and the harbor had been talking since the envoy's boots. They came with questions. Women came with covered bowls of stew. Men came with weather questions and harbor news. They wanted to see the defective bride the upper houses had sent down to the carver. Jakob met each at the door and did not invite them inside. He stood squarely in the threshold. He did not lie to any of them. He said yes, she was here. He said yes, the council had sent her. He said no, she would not be coming to the harbor market. He said, very quietly, that she was his guest. The word was not what they expected. Some of them frowned and looked past his shoulder. Some softened and looked at the ground. All of them left, and most of them came back another day. One of them was Mira, the old midwife who had brought his daughter into the world. She came on the 9th day. She came with a small clay pot of salt fish paste and did not ask in. She only stood at the door with the pot in her hands. She looked past Jacob's shoulder once, briefly, and saw Island in the kitchen. The wooden plaque sat on the shelf above her. Mira's face did not change, but her eyes did, and Jakob saw it. She handed Jakob the pot and said the council was a long way from here. She said the council was full of fools, loud enough for the kitchen to hear. Then she turned and went home. The next morning, a basket of fresh bread sat on the step. The morning after that, a small carved comb for dark hair lay there with no note. The village did not become kind all at once. Some doors stayed closed. Some eyes still slid past Aylin at the harbor. She walked with the plaque tucked into the pocket of her apron. The baker's wife began nodding to her. The harbor master tipped his cap. A child of perhaps 6 summers ran up one afternoon. He pressed a smooth black sea stone into her hand and ran away before anyone could speak. She kept the sea stone on the windowsill beside the plaque. By the end of the first month, there were 3 small things on that sill: the plaque, the stone, and a sprig of dried sea lavender she had found on the path. Jakob noticed each one. He never moved them. He never mentioned them aloud to her. He understood the meaning of those small objects. A person who had been given nothing was learning. She was learning, for the first time in her life, how to keep small things. He let the windowsill stay her own. Drop a single word in the comments below. Tell me the first thing you would have done if those envoys had set that woman on your step at dawn. 1 word is enough for me. I read every one at the end of the night, by lamplight with the kettle on. And while you are there, leave a comment about the moment that has stayed with you most so far. The collar opening in the morning light, perhaps, or the plaque in the workshop lamp, or the sea stone the child pressed into her palm. I do not need long replies. The autumn came in slow that year on the cold coast. The fog stayed late into the mornings. The fishing boats came back early from the gray water. Jakob's workshop filled with the small commissions of households preparing for winter, a chest with a tight lid, a cradle for a couple, a pair of stools for the harbor master's daughter, Marion, in the spring. Aylin worked beside him now at her own end of the bench. She had moved from the basswood fish to a row of small wooden spoons, then to a comb of her own design with 5 fine teeth, then to a smooth round bowl no bigger than her palm. She did not sign her work. He did not ask her to. She kept each finished piece on the windowsill of the side room beside the plaque. He taught her the names of the woods, one at a time, slowly. He laid each strip on the bench. He said cedar, walnut, pine, ash, oak. She would touch each one and look at his mouth and not repeat the word. But the next day, when he asked for cedar, she would bring him cedar. Her silence had its own grammar. In the evening, she sat with him by the stove and mended his work clothes. They had gone undone for years. Her stitches were even and small, and her thread choices were always right. She did not look at him as she worked. He read aloud sometimes from a book. He read from the old leather book of sea tales that had been his father's. She listened without lifting her eyes from her stitching. The room grew warm around them in the long evenings. One night, she rose from her stool and crossed to the kitchen shelf without a word. She took down the wooden plaque he had carved on her first night. She brought it back to the stove and set it on the small table between their chairs. The letters faced him. She tapped the wood once with her finger, then tapped her chest, gently above her heart. He understood. She was telling him she had accepted the name as her own. He did not trust himself to speak. He set the book down on his knee. He looked at the plaque and at her hand resting on it. He nodded slowly. He said only, "Then it is your name." He said it the way a witness signs a record before a judge. She nodded back once and took the plaque to the side room. She set it on the windowsill in its usual place. She came back and sat down by the stove again. That night, she slept differently. That was the night she first slept with the door of her side room open. He noticed it as he banked the stove. It was the small change of light at the edge of the hallway. He did not look in. He did not call out. He simply went to bed. He lay down and listened to the small, steady breath of his house. It now had 2 breathing people in it again. He slept without effort. The winter came on harder than the last few had been. The sea froze along the inner harbor for 9 days running, brittle and gray. The wood for the stove ran low faster than he had planned. Aylin understood the worry on his face before he said anything. She took up the old hand axe and went with him to the pines. She helped him split logs in the brittle cold. Her breath rose in white clouds. He saw on those cold mornings that she was stronger than she looked. She could carry more than he expected. She could swing the axe in a clean, true arc. He understood her body, like her silence, had been underestimated by everyone who had ever put a label on her. He did not speak of it. He simply made sure her gloves were thick. He made sure there was hot tea when they came back inside. He made sure she was the first to sit by the stove each evening. Her shoulders kept dropping a little further each week. In the deepest part of that winter, on a night when the wind sounded like a long note, came a knock. Not a villager's knock. It was 3 quick strikes, then a pause, then one. A Vishari knock. Jakob set down his tea. Aylin stood up from her stool. Her silver eyes went very still, the way they had been on the first morning. Jakob crossed to the door and opened it. A single envoy stood there, alone this time. He wore a longer and finer coat than the first delegation had worn. The silver thread was of a household. He bowed low in a way that surprised Jakob. He asked, in careful trade speech, whether the bride of this house was well. He asked it as a question, not a demand. Jakob did not answer at once. He stepped aside enough that the envoy could see into the warm kitchen. The envoy looked at her. His face did a small thing then, a thing almost like grief, or recognition, or the small flinch of a man who has been told a story for a long time and now sees it was wrong. He asked again carefully if he might enter. He asked if he might come in for the length of a single cup of tea. Jakob looked at Aylin. She did not move. Then slowly, she nodded once. Jakob stepped aside and the envoy came in. He removed his gloves with great care and stood by the door waiting. Jakob gestured him to the stool by the stove. The envoy sat. He did not look at Aylin until she had sat down first across the room. He spoke then, in trade speech still, but more slowly. He said his name was Veshtoren, of the household of the late High Speaker. He said the High Speaker had died in the autumn. He said her body had been laid to rest with her staff of office. She lay now in the cold halls of the Concord. He said her seat had been declared open. The long search for her successor had begun across the worlds. Then he said the thing that changed the shape of the room. He said the seat passed by blood. Under the old laws of the Concord, the seat of the High Speaker was inherited not by election and not by clan. It was inherited by blood, and by blood, and by blood alone. He said the High Speaker had borne only one child in the long years of her service. He said that child had been declared defective and given away in marriage. He said the Concord had searched the marriage records of the treaty year. He said the records named one craftsman. He had been sent personally to confirm with his own eyes whether the daughter was alive, whether she was well, whether she remembered the language of her mother. He said this last part very softly, as though afraid of his own question. Aylin sat very still in her chair. She did not look at the envoy. She looked instead at Jakob, and then at the windowsill where the plaque caught the firelight. Then down at her hands resting in her lap. Her fingers were rough now in places. There was a small scar on her thumb from a slip. She was not the woman the envoy remembered. Jakob set a cup of tea in front of Veshtoren and one in front of Aylin. He took his own cup and sat down on his own stool. He waited without speaking. He understood this was not his moment to speak now. He had given Aylin a name in this kitchen. The right to answer to her own old name or not was hers alone. He kept his eyes on his cup. Vishtoren did not press. He drank his tea slowly and spoke of small things, the winter and the road. He spoke about the kindness of the villagers who had given him directions to the house. He understood the question he had brought was the largest question this kitchen had ever held. It could not be answered in the time a kettle took to cool. He gave the room time. After a long while, Aylin lifted her hand and tapped the table once. Both men looked at her. She rose from her stool and went to the windowsill. She brought back the wooden plaque. She set it down on the table in front of Vishtoren, with the letters facing him. She tapped the wood once, then she tapped her own chest, just above her heart, the way she had done with Jakob in the autumn. Vishtoren looked at the plaque for a long moment. He read the letters silently. Then he raised his eyes to her face across the table. He did not say, "That is not your true name." He said, in the soft, formal tone of an envoy receiving a name from a sovereign, "Then by this name shall the Concord know you, daughter of the High Speaker." He bowed his head over the table. His eyes were wet. He spoke then, finally, the thing he had come to say. He said the seat of the High Speaker could not remain empty. He said the Concord had searched in vain for any other heir. He said if she returned, even now, she would be received with all honor and respect. He said the word defective would be struck from every record that had ever borne it. Aylin did not answer at once. She turned her head and looked at Jakob across the table. Jakob did not look back at her. He understood that a glance from him would weigh on her. A tilt of his face toward asking her to stay would weigh on her the rest of her life. He kept his eyes on his cup of tea. He gave her his silence. It was the first time he had ever given her the gift of his own silence as a tool. The fire in the stove cracked once. She reached across the table and took the wooden plaque back into her own hands. She held it against her chest the way she had held it that first morning. Then she set it down again on the table between herself and Vishtoren. She did something Jakob had never seen her do before. She closed her eyes. She opened her mouth. She tried to make a sound. The sound that came was small and rough and broken, like a hinge on a door closed too long. It was not a word at all. It was not even close to a word, but it was a sound she had chosen to make in this kitchen, in front of a man from the cold halls of her mother. Vishtoren did not flinch from it. He bowed his head again, slowly, in deep respect of her effort. She tried again. The second sound was a little clearer, a soft breath shaping into something almost like a vowel. She stopped and opened her eyes. She looked at Jakob across the room. She tapped the plaque on the table, then her chest above her heart, then gestured with her free hand. She gestured slowly around the warm kitchen, at the stove, the shelf, the window, the chair, the door. Then she gestured at the whole house around them twice over with great care. Vishtoren understood. Jakob understood with him. The envoy bowed his head a third time, deeply. He said the conquered would honor her choice. He asked one more thing, with all respect. He asked whether she would consider an arrangement the old records allowed. It had not been used in many generations. He said the seat of the High Speaker did not have to sit in the cold halls. It could be called to. He explained, in slow, careful trade speech, that her household, wherever it stood, would be a household of the Concord. He said any name she carried would be a name the Concord carried with her. He said this last part softly. He was looking at the wooden plaque on the table between them as he spoke. Aylin looked at Jakob for a long moment across the room. Then she nodded, once, slowly at Vishtoren. The envoy let out a breath he had been holding for the entire length of the journey from the capital. He stood. He bowed very deeply to her, then to Jakob. He said he would return in the spring with the formal delegation. He gathered his gloves and his long coat at the door. He paused on the threshold. He turned back to Jakob in the doorway. He said, in a voice low enough only Jakob could hear, that he remembered. He said he had been a young clerk in the room the night the High Speaker's child was declared defective. He said he had stood silent that night. He had been young and afraid in the back of the hall. He had thought of that silence every day since the words were spoken. He said what Jakob had given her in this small house was more than the Concord had ever given her. He bowed once more, very low, and stepped into the wind. Jakob closed the door behind him. The lantern above it flickered once and steadied in its bracket of iron. Inside the kitchen, Aylin had not moved from the table. The wooden plaque still lay where she had set it for Veshtorin to read. He went to her. He did not sit down at once. He stood beside her stool quietly. He laid his rough hand on her chair back. He did not touch her shoulder. He understood that even now, even after all the months, a hand on her shoulder had to be a thing she asked for. It was not a thing he could simply give. She lifted her own hand and laid it lightly over his on the chair. They stood like that for a while in the warm kitchen. That night, neither of them slept early. They sat by the stove for a long time without speaking. He understood an enormous thing had passed through their kitchen. The shape of the house had quietly changed. Nothing visible had moved. He understood also that the choice she had made was not a refusal of who she was. It was the first time in her life she had chosen who she was. The spring came in slow that year, the way it always did. The ice in the harbor broke at last. The first boats went out into the gray water. The village began to move again after the long stillness of winter. And one bright morning, in the second week of open water, a Concord ship slid into the outer harbor. It came under a long blue banner. The bell rang 3 times. The delegation that climbed the stone path that morning was nothing like the first one. There were no guards. There were no shrouds. There was Veshtorin in his long household coat. Behind him came 3 elders of the Concord in pale robes. Behind them, 6 envoys with folded blue cloths. They did not knock with a fist this time. They tapped, 3 quick strikes, then a pause, then one. Jakob opened the door. Aylin stood beside him in a simple gray dress of his late wife's. She had taken it in herself with careful stitches over a long winter evening. The wooden plaque hung on a thin cord around her throat. She had asked him with a gesture the night before to bore a small hole in the corner. He had done it with his finest awl. He had threaded the cord himself. She wore it now over her heart. The eldest of the Concord elders stepped forward to the open door. She was a tall woman with silver eyes, very like Aylin's. Her face was lined deep by long service. She bowed more deeply than any envoy had ever bowed at the store before. She spoke in formal trade speech. She said the daughter of the High Speaker has been found. The Concord has come to honor her and to honor the household that gave her shelter and a name. She spoke then in the language of the Concord, which Jakob did not know, but Aylin clearly did know it. Aylin's silver eyes filled, and her hand rose to the wooden plaque at her throat. She nodded slowly to the elder. The elder stepped forward and laid one of the folded blue cloths across Aylin's open palms. It was a cloth of office. Aylin held it carefully in both hands. The elder turned then to Jakob in the doorway. She did not speak in trade. She spoke in a slow, careful version of his own coast speech with a strong accent. She had been practicing for days, he could tell. She said his name as if she had earned the right. She said the Concord had spent the winter learning of the house at the end of the stone path. She said the village below had been asked, quietly, what kind of man he was. She said the village had answered well. The answer had surprised no one who knew him well. She said that under the old laws of the Concord, the household of the High Speaker carried a title for its master. The title had always belonged to the spouse of the seat, but the laws allowed otherwise. The title could be held by the head of household of any clan or world. It could be held by him if the daughter of the High Speaker named him so. She said the daughter had already named him so. She bowed again, lower than before. Jakob did not know what to do. He had not expected any of this. Not the ship, not the cloth. He looked at Aylin beside him. She was looking at him with the steady silver eyes he had seen on his step on the first morning. But they were different now. They were not searching his face for the shape of a weapon. They were waiting for him to understand. He nodded slowly to her. The elder offered him the second folded blue cloth. He took it with both hands. He did not put it on. He did not know how. He simply held it carefully, the way Aylin had taught him to hold a finished piece in the workshop. The elder smiled the smallest possible smile at him. She said in her careful coast speech that no one would ask him to leave his workshop or his village or his sea. The Concord would come to him when the Concord needed her voice. He bowed his head once to her. She said her own grandmother had been a wood-carver in a far province. She said the smell of cedar still meant home to her after 60 years. She bent and touched the threshold of the door with the back of her hand. It was an old Concord gesture of respect. She straightened. Then she stepped aside and the other elders stepped aside and the path was open all the way down to the harbor. Aelin turned to Jakob and held out her hand. She held it out palm up, the way he had once held the copper key on his palm. He did not hesitate. He laid his rough carver's hand in hers. She closed her fingers around it gently. Then she walked with him through the doorway, past the elders, down the stone path, to the harbor below. The long blue banner moved in the spring wind above the waiting ship. The villagers had come out to the harbor without being asked. They stood in a long, quiet line along the stone walls. The harbor master held his cap in his hands. Mira, the midwife, stood at the front with her arms folded and her chin held high. The baker's wife was there. The child who had given Aelin the black sea stone was there, holding his mother's hand. They watched Aelin walk past, and none of them looked away. At the end of the harbor wall, Aelin stopped. She turned to face the village. She lifted the wooden plaque at her throat with one hand. She held it up so the letters caught the spring sun. She bowed to them, low and slow, the way the elder had bowed at the door. Then she turned, and she walked with Jakob back up the stone path toward the house. She did not board the ship. She did not. The Concord delegation stayed 3 days at the harbor. They spoke with Jakob slowly and patiently about the shape of the household. It was a household that was now also the seat of a high speaker. They spoke of messengers and of a small stone outbuilding at the edge of the property. It would be for visiting envoys, so the house itself would remain the house. Jakob agreed to that. They asked Aelin, also slowly, whether she wished to relearn the speech of her mother. She did. They asked whether she wished to be taught the work of her seat. She did. They asked whether she wished to be taught the work of her seat. She did. They asked about a conquered name for her. She did not want one. She lifted the wooden plaque from her throat once more. She tapped it once. The elders bowed in unison. The matter was closed. On the third evening, before they left, the eldest asked to see the workshop. He led her there in the soft spring dusk without saying anything. She stood for a long time in the small room. She looked at the racks of chisels, the curls of cedar shavings, the row of Aelin's small finished pieces on the high shelf. She lifted the small wooden fish. She turned it in her hand. She said her people had given Aelin a collar of iron. They had called it a name. She said Jakob had given her a piece of cedar and called it a name. She said the Concord had a great deal of unlearning to do. She said her daughter, who was now Jakob's wife in the eyes of the Concord, would help them do that unlearning over the years. She set the wooden fish back on the shelf with great care. The delegation sailed at dawn the next day. The ship slid back under its blue banner. The villagers watched it go from their doorways without speaking. The harbor bell rang 3 times in farewell across the cold water. Then it was quiet again. Jakob and Aelin walked back up the stone path to the house together. The lantern above the door had burned all night again. This time, Jakob remembered lighting it. He took it down now to refill the oil for the next evening. That summer, the small stone outbuilding rose at the edge of the property where the path turned. It was set far enough back that it could not be seen from the kitchen. Messengers came twice in the first month, then once a month, then less often as the seasons turned. Aelin learned, slowly and with effort, the speech of her mother again. She did not speak it aloud yet. She wrote it, in a fine, even hand, in a book they sent. The messengers read her written answers aloud from the book, and carried her decisions home. She kept carving in the workshop with Jakob beside her each day. She made a second wooden plaque that summer, smaller than the first, with great care. She gave it to him one quiet evening. The letters cut into it spelled his name in his own coast script, careful and deep. He took it in his rough hands and looked at it for a long time. He set it on the kitchen shelf beside her own. The morning sun would find them both there each day. He did not say anything to her. He did not need to. The years that came after were not long years because they were full. The house at the end of the stone path was a household of the Concord now, but it was still a workshop, a kitchen, a side room. The windowsill held a wooden plaque, a black sea stone, a sprig of dried sea lavender, and other small things gathered slowly. Jakob grew older. His hair turned the white of sea foam, but his hands stayed steady. Aelin's hands grew stronger with every winter. The village grew used to them both. One spring, many years later, A young conquered envoy climbed the stone path. He carried a folded blue cloth on his arm. He carried a question on his face. He had come to ask the High Speaker, whose voice the conquered still carried, whether she would name a successor at last. He had been told the High Speaker did not speak. He had been told to ask his question to her husband, who would relay it. He had not been told why. Jakob met him at the door. He was very old now, his step slow but sure. He led him inside. He led the young envoy into the kitchen. Aylin sat at the table. She held a small piece of cedar and a fine knife in her hands. The wooden plaque hung on its cord at her throat, worn smooth by years of touch. She did not look up at the envoy. The young envoy bowed low and waited at a respectful distance. She finished the cut she was making. Then she set the cedar down on the table and lifted her eyes to him. They were still the deep silver of the morning Jakob had opened the door. The lines were soft. She looked at the young envoy for a long moment in silence. Then she lifted her hand and gestured to the chair across the table from her. The young envoy sat down carefully. Jakob sat in front of them both. She wrote her answer in the conquered book they carried. The young envoy read it aloud in trade speech so Jakob could hear it. She named a successor from among the elders' apprentices. It was a young woman she had met 3 winters ago when the Concord had brought a delegation through the harbor. She wrote in the last line this. She wrote that the successor was to be welcomed into the cold halls under her own name. She wrote that the successor was not to be welcomed under a label. The young envoy bowed again, low, and thanked her for her answer. Then he asked if she had any other word. She wrote one more line in the Concord book. The young envoy read it aloud, and his voice was a little uncertain on the words. He had never carried a sentence quite like it back to the cold halls before. She had written one small thing about names for them. She had written that names are made of wood as well as iron. She had written that the Concord should choose carefully. The young envoy left at the next tide. The harbor bell rang once for him because he had been only one envoy, not a delegation. The ship sailed away. The lantern above the door was lit, although it was midday. Jakob had taken to lighting it whenever a Concord ship was in the harbor. It was a habit he had begun the morning the first envoys had come. He had never broken it across all the long years between. When the ship was gone, Aylin turned from the window and went to the workshop. Jakob followed her, slowly, because his knees were not what they had been once. She took down a small wooden box from the high shelf. He had not seen her open it in many years now. Inside, on a folded square of pale cloth, lay the iron collar the envoys had brought her in on the first morning. The small red line of it was long gone cold. She set the collar on the workbench beside the cloth. She picked up a heavy chisel from the rack. She looked at Jakob and nodded once. She lifted the chisel and struck the iron ring cleanly through at its old hinge. She struck it the way a smith strikes a piece he is finally done with. The collar fell into 2 pieces on the bench. She gathered them up. She walked them out to the back of the workshop herself. She did not need help. She dropped them both into the stove for the next firing of the kiln. She came back inside the workshop quietly. She crossed to her end of the bench and picked up the small cedar. She held it out to Jakob on her open palm in the soft afternoon light. It was a tiny wooden plaque the size of his thumbnail. 2 letters were cut into it, his and hers side by side, careful and deep. He took it from her palm with great care. He set it gently on the windowsill beside the first plaque she had ever received. The afternoon light reached both wooden names at the same time. They sat there together as if they had always sat there, as if no other arrangement had ever been possible. Jakob closed the box quietly. If you have stayed with me all the way to the end of this fire, friend, thank you. Thank you for sitting in the warm with me. The story is over now. If Aylin's quiet shoulders dropping by the stove made you go still, a small like helps this fire find others like you. If you are new by this hearth tonight, please consider subscribing. Tap the small bell beside it too. That way, when I light the next lantern, you will know it has been lit. I do not post often because each of these fires takes me a long time to build properly. Down in the comments, tell me which moment in this story stayed in your chest the longest. The opening of the iron collar, perhaps, or the small rough sound she chose to make in front of Veshtoren in the kitchen, or the iron going into the stove on that last afternoon. The next fire I am building is already on the bench. It is the story of a quiet harbor master on a rain-soaked moon. He finds an alien child sleeping in an upturned boat one gray morning. What he chooses to do with the message tied to her wrist is the heart. Until then, friend, be the kind of hand that opens a door to a stranger on a cold step. Be the kind of voice that says a name aloud where it has never been spoken before. Be the kind of house that keeps a small windowsill for the things a person quietly keeps. Good night.